Hello and welcome to the CNBC Africa special. I'm Manozi Pombanjwa. It is the month of August in South Africa, and what this means is that we are celebrating South Africa's leading women in corporate, in non-profit organizations, in civil society, in government positions. What they do have in common is that they are reshaping what African leadership looks like across the board. It's with such excitement today that I'm actually sitting down with the co-founder and CEO of Spark Schools. Her name is Stacey Brewer, and I have been girl crushing on her since I found out about the amazing work that she's doing in South Africa. Stacey, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. So every time I girl crush and I start like reading up on you and all the amazing things that you're doing, there are some words that keep coming up repeatedly. You're described as a disruptor, an innovator, a game changer. That's all fair and well. How would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as restless. I'm constantly pushing to do more. When something's happening within the organization that I feel is stagnating, I always want to push the boundaries and go the extra mile so that Spark continues to lead the change across the country.
And of course, to continue to lead the change, you had to start somewhere, Stacey. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How did the idea come to you, and how were you convinced that this is the thing, this is my mandate, this is my purpose, this is the thing I'm going to actually focus on?
No, the whole idea of Spark really came out of when I was doing my MBA at a business school in Johannesburg, GIBS, the Gordon Institute of Business Science, just realizing how much money we spend as a state on education, and yet we ranked bottom of the world. And I just felt that was completely unacceptable. And so I then did my thesis on it, looking at low-fee private schools in particular, which is a global movement where parents are voting with their feet, sending their kids to private schools over free government schools. And I was just trying to understand what was going on. But I was not impressed with the low-fee private schools sector. Overall, yes, they were providing something that was more affordable to families, but the quality was very questionable. Yeah. And so Spark really started to make sure that we addressed the national crisis that we see in education in South Africa, but benchmarking on government's total cost to educate and making sure that we're offering something that's internationally competitive.
And what were the early days like? I mean, as you say it now, the value proposition is clear, the business case makes a lot of sense, but moving into a space that at the time I'm sure was quite difficult. What was your early experience?
So the early experience of Spark was that, I mean, it was tough. We had to raise money. So I don't have an education background. I had no track record. All I had was an idea.
Yeah.
And I had to speak to a lot of people to ask for money, and I got many, many no's.
Yeah.
But eventually we got one yes. And then we really were able to gain traction. It was obviously also really hard at the beginning to sell the school. We didn't necessarily have a reputation, and so we had to spend a lot of time spending time with families, building relationships with them, and then staff. Trying to recruit people into an organization that doesn't exist just with an idea or dream is really tough. Yeah. But today, I mean, we've still got quite a few of those staff members that started Spark with us today, and they were the courageous ones. And I also, I mean, thank goodness to our families for taking the first step and being progressive. And it's great to be part of the journey with them. And now we're going into high school next year, so our first grade 7s that started with us are now going into high school and continuing the journey with us.
So before we talk about the vision going forward, what's the lay of the land looking like? What's your presence like? How many schools on the ground?
We currently operate 15 schools, mainly Joburg, Pretoria, and then we've got one in Stellenbosch. We are educating over 7,000 children and employing 750 staff members. We've pretty much doubled as a network since we started Spark, so we've had huge growth. And next year we'll be operating 21 schools, so 20 primary schools, 1 high school, and aim to educate over 12,000 children. But we're going to continue to open schools across the country and ensuring that we reach as many communities as possible.
I mean, I was walking around earlier today as I came in, and lots of construction, lots of banging and drilling and so on. And obviously, this is a sign of growth. This is a sign of many and bigger things to come. What does the future look like, and how does that tie to the vision that you and your co-founder had for Spark Schools?
So, Naz, I mean, I'm glad that you're experiencing the building, because we are in the building stage of the organization. It can be very tough for some people, just depends on the way we wired. But for me, it's very exciting. We're breaking new ground. Our vision is that South Africa leads global education, which is obviously very ambitious, very powerful statement, especially when we rank bottom of the world. But everything that we do at Spark, we say, what does this look like at a national level? So if we ever went into partnership with government, would we be able to roll this out? And so our vision is to continue opening schools across the country over the next few years and engaging more where we can on a policy level, and really hoping to take a lot of what our leading practices within the organization and how can we better support schools within our community.
That's amazing. So it's a lot about scale and how do we make the excellence that we are expressing a national expression, which is actually amazing. But I do want to also talk about your leadership journey. It's quite a pleasant surprise to find out that you're a Tutu Fellow as well. So it was great to actually sit down with the Tutu Fellow. But I know that leadership must be part of your DNA and just how you're wired. Let's talk about the things that you believe have served you in the ability to lead yourself, but also to lead others.
I think the number one thing is probably grit, or as people say, persistence. So never giving up, because you absolutely have really down days or days that you're like, what's going on? Why am I actually doing this? But what gets you through? And so I'm completely convinced that what we're doing can create systemic change. Not only in South Africa, but I believe we can work with different countries across the continent or in other developing markets to support that. I'm always learning. I'm really focused on self-reflection, so constantly looking at how can I better improve my practice and learning. I mean, in a high-growth organization, you need to make sure that you're ahead of the game. Otherwise, very quickly you can become irrelevant. And so I'm constantly seeking ways to learn, both in terms of my leadership style as well as what does it look like a CEO running a big organization. So I've got a huge amount of support networks that support me in this journey.
And if you're building an organization that you almost want to inculcate that ability to self-reflect even with teams, how do you do it? How do you make sure that everyone is hungry to not only grow and to learn from whether it's mistakes or successes that they have in the business, but just this desire collectively to be better? What are your strategies as the CEO?
So it's involved in our recruitment process in terms of the type of people that we recruit. So we recruit for GEMS, which is and the last one, S, is self-reflection. So right from the get-go, in the beginning of the interview process, we see how people are able to take feedback and see if they're able to improve their practice. And the whole DNA of the organization's been built in terms of weekly coaching or feedback. If you look at the school level, our school leaders are focused on instructional leadership, where they spend a lot of time with their team looking at ways to better improve our practice so we can better serve our children. The people that have really struggled at Spark are the people that haven't shown that characteristic, and so they haven't lasted long with us. But the people that have moved within the organization in terms of promotions, the core Exco team, are the people that are able to constantly self-reflect and improve.
And oftentimes self-reflection is almost undermined as not a key part of how you grow as a leader. But you know, when we talk about leadership states, we also generally make the mistake of only talking about the good things and the leadership behaviors that have served us. But there must be leadership behaviors that didn't serve you, things that you expressed as leadership, and maybe even quite early on you realize, I need to actually work on this if I'm going to be able to lead a team and be a leader in the country as well. Anything that comes to mind for you?
I think probably the top one is in terms of control and wanting everything to be perfect. If in a higher growth organization with obviously a huge amount of people, you can't have control at all times. So instead of trying to hold everything close to me or double checking on what everyone's doing, how do I rather empower the team around me and delegate appropriately so that they are able to fulfill those tasks? Another aspect is I probably should have trusted my intuition a lot sooner. You often question feelings or ideas or thoughts or decisions that you want to make that can be seen to be controversial, but at the end of the day, that's why you're the leader, so you've got to be the one that's courageous, you've got to be the one that's bold. And I've really learned to trust and listen to my intuition more and more over time, and it often has led down the right route.
And the month of August is quite special in South Africa. It's one of those months where we can, focus the conversation on women's issues. We can begin to interrogate and explore some of the issues where we felt we've stagnated, and even celebrate where we might have had some breakthroughs. Are there any conversations that you would think we should be having at a national level that are specifically focused on women?
I think the big focus that we should, as women, be speaking about is more about creating a more inclusive environment. So instead of, at the moment, women are a big focus on women empowerment within the organization, but we don't want to do that as a result of, say, men being suppressed. So how do we ensure that every voice is still heard and we are the ones leading that change?
And I love the fact that you speak about women empowerment, because I don't doubt that it's something that you also need to think about as you build a team that then carries the Spark School vision. How does that translate into what we see at Spark? And I'm also interested because I know sometimes there's an undue pressure on women that they're going to be the champions of women empowerment in their own organizations, and it doesn't always play out that way. What's your experience been?
So Noz, we are pretty much an all-female EXCO team, not necessarily that we were deliberate. We've got a gentleman that's joining us next week as part of the EXCO team, so that will be great, more diverse. But overall, Spark is more female dominated, and my big thing within the team is saying, how do we create more players in terms of males within the organization?
And by design, Stace, that it's female dominated, and if so, what do you believe women leaders are bringing to the table?
So I believe women leaders, and so it hasn't been particular about design, but I believe women leaders, or what I've seen over the last few years of running this organization, is their adaptability. So, and I think that leads to humility within, and I mean, I'm generalizing completely with females, but we've got an ability to constantly learn, rethink on how can we become better in what we're doing, so we don't stagnate within a certain portfolio. And we adapt into an ever-changing environment where I've seen men within certain roles have really struggled to keep up to that and to adapt to what's changed. So we would recruit someone that's great for now, but 6 to 12 months later, their skill set has been completely stretched, where the women are able to move and adapt.
And regenerate in a way and sort of be agile to new contexts.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's move away from women. Let's go to the country again, and maybe even go to the continent. The leadership conversation in South Africa. Again, bringing back the fact that you're a Tutu fellow, but also just a leader in your own right. How do we grow leaders in this country and on the continent that are reflective of our aspirations as South Africans and Africans?
So Noz, it's a great question, because I speak about this even for our children. We're in an ideal position where we are educating the future of South Africa, and so how do we ensure that the leaders or the scholars within our current network are the ones that are going to be creating the change in the future? And so I think a lot of it links down to actual values. And so Spark stands for our core values of service, persistence, achievement, responsibility, and kindness. And so we speak a lot about that and explain different behaviors that we want to see, and aiming for them to be very socially aware. So not having the conversation about what profession do you want to be when you're older, what problem are you going to solve? And who are you going to bring on to make sure that you solve that problem? So this active citizenship is a big one that we focus on and driving within the organization, both from a staffing point of view as well as the scholars.
Well, I couldn't have ended it on a better note myself. What problem are you going to solve, and who are you going to bring along with you as you work towards solving this problem? It's been a fantastic conversation with Stacey Brewer. She is the co-founder and the CEO of Spark Schools, and really sharing her leadership journey with us. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. I'm Nozi Pumbandra for CNBC Africa.